clarify that remediation and compensation is not a piece of this, and remediation and compensation is yet to come. And that is the NRD process that Jeff talked about. So I just wanted to make sure that you were clear that that whole evaluation, quantification, and compensation piece for any long-term damage is not yet consummated.
I am clear on that, thank you. I was speaking with respect to the enforcement and deterrent of future actions.
Okay. Any other questions? Comments? You have a question?
Yeah, I have a few questions. The environmental law group ran off a list of metals that are in the flash. Am I on? Okay. The Southern Environmental Law Group listed a group of metals that are in the flash and now in the river. I'd like to know what form those metals are in.
Chairman, U.S.
Specifically, I think they listed arsenic, lead, and mercury.
Those are some of the common constituents and also what we're monitoring for, but I'll let John provide the more technical detail on that.
They are present basically in the elemental form that can be acted on if they're exposed to the environment, but those metals constituents also exist in native sediment. The fact that they've been concentrated and exist in that fly ash material is as a result of burning the coal that they were originally contained in. Our measurements that we're doing, we're looking at both total recoverable and dissolved fractions in the water column.
You're saying that these are in the metallic state, that is the zero oxidation state?
Well, I don't understand all of the chemistry involved, but if you were to look at the fly ash itself, it's almost very small little glass beads. The carbon material has been burned down to a point where, and if you look at it under a microscope, that's one of the methods that the USGS, EPA, and their contractor were looking at or looking for in order to determine the percent ash content in the sediment. So it's the material in an elemental form that's basically bound up in that residual fly ash. It's almost like a glass-like material.
Okay.
If it's weathered or it's subject to some sort of a condition like a low dissolved oxygen or a
Okay,
acidic.
so we're not looking at oxides, and we're looking at the metal in a zero state.
But if the metal is exposed to the environment or in the water column, it could take any of those other oxidized forms that you're mentioning. Our standards are written in terms, though, of the elemental value. And
Okay, well, there your standards are in terms of elemental.
Yes, sir.
But the metal is in the, you think the metal's in the river and?
It's in a complex within that bead. So
Right.
it's been subject to oxidation when it was burned.
Okay. How much of these metals are in the water now? Is that when we do?
I have a back of the envelope estimate, if you let me get my notes.
Go ahead.
The contractor with Corps of USGS, based on the total volume released and the percentages in the original material, I've got some figures.
Well, but I want to know what are the concentrations in the water?
Okay, I can tell you that too. Hold on.
No, I need, yeah, I guess I need those.
Yeah, I have to apologize. I don't have a laptop. I'm a tactile reader. This is my laptop.
Okay, that's all right. I'm in the same group.
Okay. And I wrote this down at one point in a meeting over the course of the past year because I knew the question would come up at some point. Let me start with the question about the level of material in the water column. And we picked out selected metals out of the laundry list that you could potentially list of the metals that are present in coal ash. And we focused on two in particular, arsenic and selenium. And that was due to the fact that they showed up in the highest percentage in the sediment at the first river crossing station that we were monitoring right there at the North Carolina-Virginia line. Now, we don't have sediment criteria, but we do have sediment screening thresholds. And for those two metals, they were among the highest that we've ever seen, 90th percentile of all the observations we have ever made in the state. They're not above the level of concern, though. There's another screening threshold that we haven't exceeded that value. But given the fact that they were in that high percentile of observed values that we've seen in the program ever, we decided those were two to focus on for their potential to be released and show up in the water column. For dissolved arsenic, we have the water quality standards that we have in the books. 340 micrograms per liter is the acute value for the freshwater protection. 150 micrograms per liter is the chronic value for aquatic life. And 10 milligrams per liter for potable water supply. We never saw arsenic above 0.5 to 0.55. So orders of
0.55
micrograms per liter, parts per billion.
Okay.
So those are orders of magnitude lower than
Okay,
our
and
standards. Selenium, highest values that we saw were somewhere in the neighborhood of 0.7 to 0.8 micrograms per liter. The standards in total recoverable are 20 micrograms per liter for acute,
Okay,
5 for chronic, 170 for potable water supply.
okay. You don't have figures for lead or mercury?
We have that data, the presentation that I put together.
Okay, but you don't have it right now?
I don't, we
Okay,
have
that's
that
fine.
data.
You don't, I'm not gonna send you scurrying to your office, that's unreasonable.
I appreciate that.
All right, thank you. I think that takes care of that.
I'm going to find in my notebook, I won't take your time right now, during the meeting or after, I'll give you the figures. The numbers that I have were an estimate of the total amount of mercury, selenium, and was at least one other metal of concern that would have been contained in 39,000 cubic yards of material.
Okay. Okay, I have a question specifically for the Southern Environmental Law folks. You all hammered pretty hard on this. I'd like to know what you propose ought to be done to remove the remaining fly ash from the river.
Well, it is a complex problem, but again, I would say two pieces to that. One is we're working with or dealing with a company that, as I said, a $120 billion company 2.5 times larger than the Commonwealth of Virginia. Our recommendation is reject the settlement that we've got before you and direct the parties to get back to working on a new settlement that puts real resources to resolving those issues. One additional point on that I'd make is Mr. Reynolds of DEQ is referenced a couple times Virginia Water Control Law and the $32,500 per day per violation limit there. This consent order addresses both the Virginia Water Control Law and the Virginia Waste Management Act. And the two acts each have separate penalty provisions in them. So at a minimum, we should be, the floor should be $5 million of doubling if you accept the DEQ staff's math on the per day per violation number, because it's $32,500 per day per violation under both statutes. But really, as we've documented in our pre-filed comments, $50 million is what we should be working on to resolve these issues and getting the parties back to the table to come up with a solution around that.
Okay, that's all fine and good as far as the money goes. Now, will you answer my question? What do you think ought to be done to remove the remaining fly ash from the river?
Well, respectfully, sir, as an attorney and not an environmental scientist, I think the money could be used to bring on someone like Professor Lemney at Wake Forest, who's an expert in coal ash pollution, who's an expert in these issues. $50 million, bringing the right people to the table, could come up with a solution. I would say I wouldn't rely exclusively on folks with JDs to come up with that answer. I think you're going to need some PhDs, perhaps some MDs as well. A whole lot of letters involved.
Okay.
But I don't think we have to resolve that issue today. What we have to do is send the matter back to the parties with a direction to put the resources that Duke has at stake to resolving this problem. You know, Duke created this problem. It's up to Duke to resolve the problem. It was their failure, ignoring 30 years of warnings, that led to the situation we're in today. We're not going to fix that in 15 minutes, but we can direct them to put some real resources to solving the problem. Thank you.
Any other questions from the board?
John, could you restate for me which fund this, well, I guess it's 2.25 million goes to?
I'm sorry, where's the 2.25?
Which fund does it go to and how is it managed after that?
Okay, so there's no specific fund of 2.25 million goes to. It could be channeled, and I think this is what you're implying through the Water Resources Fund, to the extent it satisfies projects that are contemplated under the consent order. I think that would be fine, and that's why it's indicated in there as a potential vehicle to get that money to the communities and get shovels in the ground on it. It could be a grant. It could be, there isn't a specific fund for it.
But DEQ establishes that vehicle and ensures that it goes.
We'll coordinate, for example, on a case-by-case basis that's identified in the consent order. We'll coordinate on those projects to make sure they're fitting within the rails of the order, what our expectations are under the order.
And my next question, this may be outside some of your discussions, but has there been any discussion as to, I mean, we've had a lot of discussion about what Duke's going to do to remediate, what they're going to do to fix this, what they're considering. Has there been any discussion on behalf of Duke of what they're going to do to prevent reoccurrence of this in the future? Have they changed their methods so, this doesn't happen 30 years again from now?
Well, I think you're addressing a potentially overall larger question, but when it comes to the Dam River Station, those coal fire facilities have been closed down. The impoundments that are the subject here are being closed. The 48-inch pipe has been plugged. So to the extent that those measures have been taken to preclude this from happening again, it looks like they're there. They've also switched over to natural gas with another unit. So that's the kind of work that normally you would see getting done. On a larger question, I don't know that I can address that because they've got a lot of facilities.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board?
Thank you. Okay, so if I'm trying to summarize what I think I understand, the 2.5 million comes out to under 32,500 a day, comes out to 77 days. Is that how you figured it out?
Yeah.
No, am I wrong? I did it on my calculator. On my
The 77 days, also I'll note that for purposes of negotiation, the 2.5 does exceed the number of days that's part of the methodology that was used to arrive at a settlement. So you're not going to be able to easily back into it was exactly 77 days.
Okay, so you're putting the uncertainty of the fact that you're not finding the data ongoing to say that.
We try to maximize this as much as we possibly could. At the end of the day, and I said this to Duke over and over, my job is to get as many projects to the local communities as we possibly can, and that means more money.
And so, theoretically, we could go back and spend more time and see if there's more money to be spent to look for a solution to cleaning up the river, to find out how much that would cost to remove the coal ash and to see if there's more data. But your approach is a sooner settlement in less information, perhaps.
We're always going to try to look for an expedient settlement that satisfies what we're required to do under the state water control law, and under our criteria and everything. But remember, this isn't designed to get us to remediation. okay? That's what an administrative order on consent is designed to do.
Okay,
Okay, get the problem fixed. And on the backside of that, when it comes to NRD, there's a separate process to address that. And to the extent that there's still a question on that, and there is, we have to get through the injury assessment, monetize that, and keep the stakeholder groups involved with it. Mr. Lemley's been mentioned a couple times. It's interesting that he came up with a figure that